put it together, because I think there's every desire among you. Only need a few thousand people to do real damage and to wreak real havoc. I think the desire is there. I'm hoping they're just not organized enough to get it done.
And the saddest part is you actually hit the nail right on the head. We cannot just hope and pray that this doesn't happen. And when it does, people start putting up the emoji of their hands together, you know, my thoughts and prayers are with you. No, no, no. It doesn't work that way. It really doesn't work that way. And I believe that Joe Biden's administration, including the FBI and Secret Service, our law enforcement, who I praise all the time on the show, because despite even what had happened with me, I have nothing but respect for law enforcement, for anyone that puts on the uniform. And I don't just mean military, I don't just mean, you know, Secret Service, FBI, I'm talking about all uniforms, firefighters, police officers, you name it. And I believe that they are not just going to hope that nothing happens. I believe that they are already formulating, if not already have, a plan in order to ensure that this bullshit doesn't happen again, not in August, not in 2022, and certainly not in 2024. And I don't believe that nothing is going to happen. I believe something will happen, but I believe that our law enforcement, our intelligence agencies that are monitoring this, you know, very, very, very carefully, that they will have more information than obviously what either you or I do, and that they will put an end to this very, very quickly. They will not allow what happened on January 6th to happen again under Biden's watch. But you're right. What happens when you have 2,000, 5,000, about 50,000 people getting together, armed and dangerous, and willing to sacrifice themselves for the supreme leader? That's what Donald Trump wants. You know, the best way to become a dictator is you stifle somebody's First Amendment rights, right? And then you bring in the military to take control of the government, or in this case, a paramilitary, a group of idiots running around with Trump, you know, flags and, you know, MAGA flags and the Make America Great Again, you know, paraphernalia. That's really the dangerous part. Now, speaking just quickly about August, I personally don't believe anything is going to happen in August. Simply,
of course not.
Right, and mostly because D.C. is closed in August. Congress isn't even in session. So even if he was to be somehow, right, the miracle of God that he gets reinstated as president, you can't even do it properly because Congress isn't even in session. So it was just the wrong month for them to have picked. They should have said July, they should have said September, but they picked the worst month because nobody's even there within which to reinstate him as president. It's crazy.
Speaking, by the way, if this is a tangent we don't want to go down, then let's not go down it. But because you mentioned if by the grace of God Trump is reinstated, the anti-Semitism stuff, right? The people who say Trump's obviously not an anti-Semitic guy, his daughter converted to Judaism, his grandkids are Jewish, his son-in-law who's Jewish is in this position of privilege in the administration and all of this different stuff. But to me, that is meaningless. I mean, there's everything from anti-Semitism to philo-Semitism to people like the Saudis who want to do business with Jews because they think they're clever, which is still based on the same anti-Semitic tropes. What's like the truth about Trump's personal view on that?
Donald Trump doesn't care if you're Jewish, Christian, but he does care if you're Muslim. He believes that all Muslims are actually Islamic terrorists. That's in his mind. But Judaism, Catholicism, you know, he doesn't care. And why? Because he has no religious conviction of his own. So the fact that Ivanka, would he prefer her not to marry a Jew? Maybe yes, maybe no. He didn't really care because he has never himself been to church except for the one time that he was confirmed, which is the picture that he shows, you know, all the time, right? And as he's, you know, holding the Bible, he doesn't know the Bible. He doesn't understand, you know, the meaning of religion. He's never sat for a sermon or for Mass, right? He just hasn't. And again, he has no religious conviction. And all you have to do is just recall when they asked him one time, you know, if you were to apologize or if you were to go into confession, right, from a mistake, you know, what would that mistake have been? There's no need for me to, you know, to go to confession or to, you know, to apologize to God. I've never made a mistake. This is a man who is incapable of understanding anything other than himself, his personal wishes and his personal wants, because he's ignorant, he's arrogant, and he's just stupid. He's just plain stupid, and he believes in nothing other than himself. The world starts and ends with him. Now, David, let me just jump back into this. In Philip Rucker and Carol Lenig's upcoming book, I Alone Can Fix It, they show the genesis of the big lie, having come from an allegedly drunken Rudy Giuliani, encouraging Trump to just go and claim the victory, regardless of the vote tally at the time. That's what I was talking about, early on in the show. Now, even after Arizona was called for Biden, he still encouraged Trump to just go declare victory right now. Now, according to the book, Mark Meadows, as you stated, was vehemently against Rudy's plan. What do you think actually changed in Mark Meadows and the others, who at least displayed a shred of decency before this election?
I think it's just once the cat is out of the bag, their only option is either you quit or you publicly say, I don't agree with that, in which case you're fired, or you end up just going with it with the calculation that, hey, listen, maybe this will somehow work, maybe somehow the results will end up favoring Trump, and I want to continue being chief of staff or whatever. I think it's the same self-preservation that motivates Trump himself, where they say, well, it wouldn't have been my choice to start this we won stuff, but now that Trump did it, what choice do they really have other than quitting or getting themselves fired? It seems like it's not really much of a choice at all.
Yeah, I mean, I don't believe that they had some coming to Jesus moment or some religious or belief system that had them. I agree with you. That's what we were saying early on, in the show when we were just chatting about it. It's all about their own preservation, and you really can't have an administration run on self-preservation versus on what's doing right for not just yourself but right for the country. But book after book, on the final days of the Trump administration, we hear a constant theme, right? Adults inside the administration were on guard on election night, afraid of what Trump was willing to do to keep hold of power. Now, what I find astounding is that there were no safeguards to prevent any of this from actually happening other than relying on people's sense of duty to the country and to their position. Now, the fact that we didn't end up in a bigger crisis, I truly believe, is more luck than anything else. Discuss this with me and my listeners.
Yeah, I completely agree. And, oftentimes when we think about history, we get this feeling of inevitability, that it went the way it did, and it was certain to go that way. In other words, the inputs that we had were inevitably going to lead to the outcomes that we had. But it's really not like that. And sometimes seemingly irrelevant little details can significantly change the course of how things go. Even the 2016 election, at the end of the day, it was only a few, it was relatively few votes in just a few states that meant Trump was president instead of Hillary Clinton. Even in 2020, it was slightly more, but still relatively few votes in a few states that meant Trump didn't win. And I think that there was a real a bullet dodge to a degree, as bad as things were. The pandemic is sort of evidence of that. I mean, it's hard to imagine. In my birth country of Argentina, one of the worst pandemic responses in the world, but the U.S. under Trump was very, very bad. And imagine if he had one, what would have become a vaccine distribution, just to give an example. So as bad as it was, I agree that, I don't know if it's luck or odds, it could have been dramatically worse.
Now, you know that, David, you and I have that in common, by the way.
What, Argentina?
Yeah, my grandmother was born in Argentina, in Buenos Aires, just like you.
That's where I was born. That's incredible.
Yeah, yep. That was a long time ago, and I miss her dearly. But yeah, I noticed that with you, that you were born in Argentina, specifically in Buenos Aires. Same as mi abuela. I do want to ask you this, though, because since you brought up Argentina, which right now is really going through a world of pain as it relates to this pandemic, but there's turmoil right now all over the world, right? You turn on the television, you see what's going on in Cuba, you see what's going on in Haiti, and in so many other places around the world, right? Donald is right now using these issues that are going on, and no two are actually the same, right? One was about the execution of the president in Haiti, and what's going on in Cuba, of course, is the cost of living, the fact that there's no food, there's no opportunity, and so on. So every one of these countries have various different issues that their people are contending with. But Donald is grouping them all together, and whose fault do you think it is? It's Joe Biden's fault.
Guess.
It's Joe Biden's fault.
I was going to say, or communists or socialists.
No, it's all Joe Biden's. What are we doing? Under my administration, this never would have happened, right? This is what he's saying, and what blows my mind, for God's sake, people, put the fucking Visine in your eyes so that you can see clearly. It's just not true. Right? Under his administration, nothing would be different. The world is the world. It moved in its direction that it did. The pandemic created a problem, not just here in the United States, but across the entire globe. On top of that, Cuba's been going through its own issues. Now, of course, the pandemic is not helping, right, in order to, bring food and opportunity and, the rise in inflation over there. And Haiti, what do you think, Joe Biden sent somebody over there to kill the Haitian president? But this is what Trump does. He puts stuff out there, which in essence is true. The world right now is upside down. But the untruth is what he would have done to stop it. That this would never have happened with me. Look at what's happening now with Russia, with this new R-Evil, that group of hackers that somehow managed to disappear. This would never happen under my administration. I would call Vladimir. I'd call Putin and tell him to stop it, right? And his people fucking believe him. They believe him like the cult leader that he is. What do we need to actually do in order to stop this nonsense? And now, of course, everybody, looking to companies like Facebook, and they're looking to companies like Google to start to do their job in helping to curb all of this misinformation, disinformation. But I don't know if that's enough.
I don't know if it's enough, and it's just going to be called suppression of speech, sadly, and it'll become part of the narrative of what's being done wrong. I mean, yeah, the technique is called the fire hose of falsehood. You throw a bunch of stuff out there. It all sounds overwhelming. I mean, look, Argentina's chaotic, and Cuba, and Haiti. Then you step back and you say, wait, Argentina was chaotic while Trump was still president. Haiti's been the poorest country in the Western Hemisphere for decades now. That didn't change at all. It didn't improve at all when Donald Trump was president. Cuba, the situation in Cuba since 1959 has been close to what it is right now. And in fact, the sanctions that President Obama eased, which President Trump put back in, certainly didn't help the situation in Cuba one bit. But who's going to do that, right? I mean, Fox News isn't going to say, let's break down these 4 or 5 things, add gas prices to it, which we understand why they're climbing, add grocery prices. You throw it all together and it sounds like pretty convincing, because that's a lot of stuff that's bad. Only if you take it piece by piece can you break it down, and nobody's really taking the time to do that.
You can't, because he throws so much shit against the wall that you can't actually piece it apart. Right. It's just impossible. And yes, I am waiting to see what this Biden administration is going to do. Let's just use Cuba as the example, because we can talk about each and every country and what the United States needs or can do in order to help. There's a whole slew of Cuban Americans in this country, and I can understand and sympathize with them when you have family members in another country that's literally miles from the Floridian coastline, right? That this is just terrible, and there has to be a way that we can just put onto a barge. Just send food over there. Let's just help them with stuff. Start small. Just do something positive. I mean, we have enough food. There's billionaires that are out there that have all forms of these different political offshoots of their company that they'll make donations to. Let's just send a couple of plane loads or boatloads of cargo ships full of food, just so that people will relax if their bellies are full. Let's just stop the violence and stop the military attacking the people. There are so many things that the president can do, and work with private industry. I mean, they have these, they have money that's set aside in order to do this. I mean, just take like the Melinda Gates Foundation as an example. I don't buy $100 million worth of food and send it over there. Rest assured, rest assured it'll calm things down for a couple of days so people can start to breathe. And then you start to figure out, what else do we need to do? We got to get them vaccinations. I think the whole world needs to be vaccinated. Let's finish with what we started here, and let's move. Let's move to the next country and the next country. I mean, that's who we are. That's what America's all about. We're supposed to be the country that helps everybody. That's just my opinion.
And I would add to that also, let's ease those Cuban sanctions that Trump put back in place, because, listen, the point since '59 was to use them to try to get them to change their government. I'm not an authoritarian, so I'm not a fan of the Cuban regime, but the sanctions program has failed and it's hurting the people. Let's back off of that.
Could you imagine if Biden actually did something that helped the Cuban people right now? The first thing that they would say is, well, America's not bad, right? Cuban regime. You've been lying to us all these years. They're the ones that put food on our table. They're the ones that are helping us, right? Enough is enough, and maybe there's an internal change. I like you, I'm not an authoritarian on it, but that just seems to be logical, to me. Now, some Democrats believe that it's time to go on the offensive and force the GOP to answer for their insanity by portraying them as they are, rightly believing that the racism and the conspiratorial ranting will be a huge turnoff to suburban voters, and the more the party makes that front and center, then the better it's going to be on Election Day. Now, that said, Democratic Party orthodoxy still stress that kitchen sink issues like jobs and infrastructure have more impact than delving into the GOP's madness. What's your point of view on that?
This is really tough. I was just talking to the political scientist, Rachel Bidikofer, about this, who's really good on this issue. The Republican Party has abandoned policy, right? If you even just look at the videos from CPAC last week, there was no economic program put forward. It was just Joe Biden's socialism would be really bad. There was no education policy put forward other than we need to ban critical race theory in schools. So when they've abandoned policy, we might think, oh, Democrats just come in and they list policies and voters will just be, oh, wow, one side's talking about nonsense and one side has policies. It'll be really clear Democrats will win 22, they'll win 24. It doesn't work that way. It just doesn't work that way. The reason that these cultural issues are what the right is focusing on is because they see their followings growing, they see their donations growing, they see that it's actually winning them elections. And so I am sort of unclear at this point. If you can fight policy with better policy, that's a real clear win. If you're trying to throw policy when half the country doesn't seem to care and cares more about owning the libs and memes and calling things socialist, I have no idea how you fight against that.
I have no idea either, which is why I'm asking you the question. It blows my mind to see what's going on. Because I personally think that Bill Kristol summed up CPAC the best with his tweet yesterday, and I quote, "This weekend's confederacy of dunces was a window into what conservatism has become. There was, of course, no pushback from anyone in the GOP. Nearly every speaker assured the CPAC attendees that they were all victims and potential martyrs." I end quote. What do you think it will take for the current GOP to abandon this suicide pact with this MAGA lunacy?
They have to start losing and losing big. And what's really crazy is, under this package, they did lose the House in 2018. They lost the Senate in 2020, and they lost the White House in 2020. For a lot of voters, that would be enough to say it failed. But when they say, well, in 2018 it made sense because when you win the White House in the first midterms, you always lose, so they excuse that. And then they don't really believe they lost the Senate and the presidency in 2020, so they go, well, we didn't even really lose there. They're not ready to abandon it yet. So I think sustained losses, I think that the MAGA people losing in 2022 will probably be damaging to the movement. And certainly if 24 implodes, but it's going to be sticky because 74 million people voted for the guy, and 2/3 of them say at least 2/3 say they would do it again. So they've not lost the will yet.
Yeah, I don't know if they say the 2/3 was based upon the fact that they're just staunch Republicans, or that they would actually wanted to be Donald Trump. I mean, that was never really properly identified. But one thing for certain is that his base of around 28% of the Republican Party, that is his core base. Now, is that enough to win an election? No. Do I think Donald Trump's going to run again in 2024? No, for a host of different reasons, including indictments. Including indictments coming up, including the fact that he knows that he will lose the election again, and his ego cannot stomach another loss. And this bullshit line of it was stolen. Notice what Donald Trump always does. It's not about me. They stole it from us. That's his line to his listeners. But in his mind and in his heart, it's all about him. They stole this from me, and I want it back.
That's super interesting because especially in the Maria Bartiromo interview on Sunday, he seems to be using the language of a guy who's running more than he has at any point. And my instinct was that there were two things that were the most likely to keep him from running. One, his picks in 22 all lose, and he's just powerless. He loses political capital that way. Sees the writing on the wall and says, all my friends lost in 22. It's not looking good for me in 24. The other thing would be that his health is just not suitable to running a campaign. But you think it's not going to happen for other reasons?
Yeah, for other reasons. One, I believe that the district attorney here in New York, as well as the attorney general, Tish James, I believe that additional indictments are on their way, superseding indictments as well. I also believe that the American people have had enough. I really do. Now, that base of 28% appears to me to be dwindling, and you know that it is. And unfortunately, not fast enough for all of us. You know, it's a problem that I like to term as Googleized, right? We all want things instantaneous. We want our information on this spot. We want our deliveries through Amazon on the spot, right? This is what we've become. We've become this instant gratification society, and that doesn't happen with justice. But rest assured, his eponymous company, his kids, so many people around him are all going to face the court system, right? That's my opinion, and that's just the start of it. You know, I also, as I stated before, his ego, his fragile ego, will not allow him to accept another loss. Right now, as he speaks and as he's talking about running again and sort of floating the idea, that's all just part of the grift. That's the money grift, and he's so fucking good at it. You can't. I'm telling you, David, there is nobody better at grifting money than Donald Trump. He has perfected it, right? He really has. He has perfected it as far as a politician is concerned. But I do want to ask you this, David. In a July 12th tweet, you actually wrote, it's still legal to discriminate against people based upon sexual orientation and gender identity in 20-plus states. But suddenly, Republicans want to protect anti-vaxxers in the same way race and religion are protected. What a country. Now, if you would discuss with me what it is in the makeup of the GOP that has created this outright hostility towards vaccination, or do they just see a winning political issue to rally their base and to raise money?
It's so perplexing because this is the vaccine they believe their dear leader got for them. And yet, so many of them don't want it. It really does not make any sense to me. And I think it's different things for different people. There are lots of people who are just prone to conspiratorial thinking. So you hear about magnetized vaccines, you hear about it'll make you infertile, and they fall for that. The other side of it is that the vaccine rollout was a disaster under Trump, and it's been really pretty good under Joe Biden. So it's become, Biden wants me to get the vaccine. Whether I believe it's the Trump vaccine or not, as many of them do, Biden's the guy who wants me to get it, and he says if I get it on the 4th of July, we can have a cookout and all of this. Nope, that's Joe Biden telling me how to live my life, so I'm against that. But the hypocrisy with the non-discrimination stuff, the whole point of, for many of these folks, saying sexual orientation shouldn't be protected is that they say people choose their sexual orientation. Now, I don't know about you. I don't remember ever saying, I'm going to decide today to like girls. I just always knew I was heterosexual growing up. So it doesn't seem to be a choice. But if that's a choice, getting vaccinated or not is a choice. Why would we protect that? Why would we regulate and tell the government to force businesses to say, regardless of vaccine status, you can come in when it's a choice. There's no bigger choice than getting or not getting a vaccine.
Yeah, I don't even know how you put the two of them together in the same sentence, vaccination and sexual orientation. I just don't see, I don't see where there's going to be an intersection of the lines. They just don't seem to be ever going to cross paths. It's like talking about, the difference between a grape and a watermelon. I mean, I truly don't understand it. And your tweet really, it got me thinking, and I was trying to really figure out what the hell is going on here, because even after your answer, I can't. What bothers me the most, right, is the fact that these Trump supporters, and Trump, of course, himself, believes that he should be the recipient of the Nobel Peace Prize based upon his amazing job with the coronavirus. Right? It's always about him. It's him. It's him. I should get the Nobel Peace Prize. I know more than the scientists. I this, I that. I'm so tired of his eyes already, right? But what bothers me the most is we know that there's this new Delta variant that's out there. And we've seen, because numbers don't lie. Donald does, but numbers don't lie. And the number of people who are dying of the Delta variants of the coronavirus has spiked over the course of the past couple of weeks. But here's what facts that we know, not innuendo, not Donald Trump spouting more bullshit. Here's what we know. We know that 98% of the people who died over that course are unvaccinated, and only 2% are vaccinated. That's pretty good numbers. And if you had half a brain, you'd be running off to your doctor right now to get the vaccination, because it clearly works. And the rest of it, to me, just doesn't make any sense. But what bothered me is the fact that Trump refused to acknowledge that science is real, that the pandemic is real, and he watched as 607,000+ Americans die as a result of his incompetence. And that's going to be on his soul for the rest of his life. And let me tell you, when he starts calling it the China virus, it is not. We need to start calling it what it is, and that's the Trump virus. But as we're beginning to wind down, I have just two more questions for you, David, right? So I want to switch gears for a moment. I've been reading a lot about Ron DeSantis lately. I despise Ron DeSantis. I don't know about you, but I fucking look at him, and I've already broken 2 television sets, so when I see him now, I just click it off because I can't afford, to buy a third one, right? And how he's on this, collision course to unseat Trump and claim the conservative throne for 2024. Now, do you see the possibility in this occurring? And would we be better or worse off with a DeSantis running versus a potential Trump 2024? Is the cure to Trump, in essence now, worse than the disease at this point?
Yeah, I think that actually, if you said to me, the next president will be Trump or DeSantis, I think I say let's go with Trump, because DeSantis is far more competent. DeSantis has a lot of the same terrible instincts. DeSantis has a lot of the same amoral and immoral values and perspectives, but he's far more competent and would be likely to get way more of those things done. Whereas with Donald Trump, a lot of the things, the wall, for example, the rhetoric on the wall. Well, it was never going to happen, and it didn't happen, okay, because the follow-through was simply not there. The concern with DeSantis is that it's all the bad instincts of Trump plus the ability to actually get some of this stuff implemented.
Yeah, for me, I see it as a very tough call. I'm not sure which one is worse, and I'm not so sure that the incompetence is the offsetting factor to Ron DeSantis being more competent. The problem, though, is Donald Trump, if in fact that he takes the White House in 2024, the first thing he's going to do is he's going to create a list of individuals that he wants payback. He can't help himself. That's just who Donald Trump is. And he's going to look to become an authoritarian, a dictator, a supreme leader, right? A monarch in this country. And while Ron DeSantis is, in my mind, one very fucked up human being, I'm not so sure that he actually sees himself in that role as like the Kim Jong-un of America, and Donald Trump does. So that's a really tough call. And let's just all stop for one moment and just say a prayer to whoever you pray to, that neither of these two assholes end up on the 2024 ballot, for the Republican Party. So, again, as we're now winding down the hour. My last question to you, David. I'm curious what still keeps you up at night when you're thinking about Trump and the larger MAGA movement. Or do you feel that Trump has been marginalized by, by his loss and is more a rambling loser, than a threat at this moment in time? Or do you still worry about what he's actually capable of unleashing after listening to his latest CPAC speech? If you would discuss this with my listeners.
My concern is less about Trump and his harebrained ideas. It's about the fact that he still has so many sycophantically devoted followers. Because if you remove the followers and Trump has the same ideas and the same microphone, at the end of the day, he's speaking into the microphone in an empty room and nobody's listening. And so my biggest concern is there's so many wacky people that have run. There's this guy, Glenn Miller, who's now in prison for murder, who I interviewed 10 years ago, who would run every election cycle, and his thing was, the problem is the Jews. That's crazy, but he never built a movement around it. He never had a real shot at winning anything. He did ultimately go and kill 2 people, which is insane. It's horrifying. But at the end of the day, Trump has the room full of people. It's actually tens of millions of people still, even conservatively. And so what keeps me up at night is the fact that after all of the losses, 2018, 2020, after the COVID mishandling, after the global humiliations, that we're still talking about, could he win? When in a sane world, the answer would be, of course he can. Sadly, the answer is he could.
It's amazing. I'm so in line with that thought, because it's so rare in our history that a sitting president loses the re-election, and loses it at the margin that Trump lost, despite the fact that the number of actual votes were less than what people believe, but the fact that the electoral votes was such a landslide, the same landslide that he won by. And that there's this group of sycophantic followers that will follow him over the cliff. Again, I don't believe that Trump is going to be running. I think that there are too many intervening factors right now. It's going to be the loss of his company. You see what's happening with Weisselberg now. You see what's going to be happening with Rudy, who he's throwing under the bus, removing Weisselberg as a director on over 30 corporations. What's going to happen when all of the loans start coming due? I think he's got a whole slew of issues that he has to contend with, and I don't think that a presidential run is going to be on his mind. Though the craziest thing that I've started hearing from friends of mine is that Don Jr. in his, whether it's his coked out stupor or his drunken, stupor, keeps talking about he wants to run now in 2024. And look, I promise you this: if Don Jr. ends up running for president of the United States, I'm putting my hat in the ring, because I know exactly how to take Don Jr. apart. It's not difficult either. The same way I've been trying to tell the Democrats there are ways to take Donald Trump apart, right? They just don't do it. They don't fight. They just don't fight hard enough. They don't fight smart enough. While I love the fact that Joe wants to be this empathetic president to all, as the president, there's a ton of responsibility sitting on your shoulders, one of which is to protect the republic, protect our democracy, and uphold our Constitution. And that starts with the Justice Department. And as happy I was that he had chosen and appointed Merrick Garland to be our AG. Right now, I'm feeling very let down by the guy. So I'm certainly hoping that he actually steps it up and starts behaving, I hate to say it, more in the manner that Trump would have had them that the Republicans would have had them behave, because that's the only way to put an end to the Donald Trumps, the Ron DeSantis's, the Josh Hawleys, the Marjorie Taylor Greens of the world, the Matt Gaetz of the world. You really do need a Justice Department that's going to hold each and every person responsible for their own dirty deeds. And with that, David, I want to thank you for joining us on Mea Culpa. Lastly, before I let you go, what are you doing these days?
Just hosting my show. Things have been it's more than a full-time job. Yeah, hosting the show, 150 radio and TV stations. We've got almost 1.5 million YouTube subscribers. It's tying up all of my time.
And what's the name of the show? Tell my listeners. Maybe they want to listen to it.
The David Pakman Show. Yeah, find it. DavidPakman.com. Pakman. All of my stuff is there.
David, I wish you the best. I will speak to you very soon. If you ever need me for anything, you know where to find me. I'm on house arrest.
My pleasure. Thank you for having me.
You got it, David. And now for today's Mea Culpa. Donald Trump's latest turn towards extremism reminds me of the parable I learned as a grade school student about the scorpion and the frog. For those of you who don't know the story, it goes something like this. A scorpion asks a frog to carry him over a river. The frog is afraid of being stung, but the scorpion argues that if it did so, both would sink and the scorpion would drown. The frog then agrees, but midway across the river, the scorpion does indeed sting the frog, dooming them both. When asked why, the scorpion points out that this is nature. Nobody is going to confuse me with Dr. Seuss, but it's worth pointing out the lesson here when it comes to Donald Trump, who by now doesn't know his true nature. That said, the GOP thought it could swim across the river with Trump on its shoulders and use his popular appeal and fundraising ability to bolster the party's fortunes. They could control him, they thought. He would move back towards the middle once elected. The fact that none of this happened and Trump stung his party handlers repeatedly will go down in history as one of the great political horrors of this early century. But what's worse is that despite getting stung over and over and over again, the GOP is lined up to take more abuse. The upside, they would argue, is the political power derived from Trump. But the MAGA movement is nothing like the apparatus and power built in the wake of, say, Ronald Reagan, who shared his victory and brought scores of newly minted Republicans with him for the ride. The Reagan Revolution was a Republican revolution. But any attempt to make comparisons between him and Trump are simply asinine. Trump's power only benefits Donald Trump and those he directly shines his light upon. But that favor is conditional. It comes with strings and an oath of everlasting loyalty to the man. The MAGA revolution is ultimately about one man and one man only. It cannot scale because Trump does not want to share the light. He will never pass the baton, and he wants it only for himself. What he has created is the first modern dictatorship in American history. The fact that he is out of power is irrelevant. He still has the means and capacity to inflict tremendous damage. His latest turn towards an even more extreme iteration is the most frightening version of Donald Trump to date. The GOP should have squashed him like a fucking bug when it still had the chance. Now it's too late, but history will judge those who have let him operate poorly. At the moment, that might be the best we can hope for until the MAGA fever breaks. And thanks for listening. Mea Culpa is brought to you by Audio Up, Minus Touch, and LSJ Media, and it's written and produced by Jimmy Jelinek. Executive producers are Jared Kustat, Jimmy Jelinek, myself, Michael Cohen, and Phil Alberstadt. Our editor is Lisa Orkin. It may be a new day politically, but nowadays the landscape is more confusing than ever. Donald Trump may have lost the battle for the presidency, but in many ways, Trumpism is winning the war on the state and local level. Mea Culpa is here to help guide you through the wilderness and keep you informed. And let's face it, we all want Trump, Rudy, and the rest of these seditious traitors to see justice. And folks, it's coming. So stay tuned as I guide you through the twists and turns of the criminal process that will ultimately see them behind bars. Mea Culpa, nothing but the truth.
This is my mea culpa. Don't laugh at me. If I tell you my story, don't cry for me. I did my time, that's fine by me. This is my mea culpa. If
Hi, I'm Danny LaRue, the Real GM Radio Podcast, and the biggest story right now in the NBA is Giannis Antetokounmpo, as the Greek Freak, the two-time regular season MVP, is making his impression felt in these NBA Finals. 41 points, 13 rebounds, 6 assists in the Bucks' dominant win over the Suns in Game 3, on the heels of 42 points and 12 rebounds in the Game 2 loss to Phoenix. And Giannis has been absolutely incredible, joining Shaq as the only two players in history to have 40-point, 10-rebound games in consecutive games. Truly incredible. And then the list, if you say even in the same finals, adds Elgin Baylor or LeBron James. And Giannis has done it on the defensive end too. He's made a real difference there. And we saw the difference in the Bucks. They looked so much more alive in Game 2 than they did in Game 3. And that's only going to hopefully continue moving forward as we get into the nitty-gritty of these NBA Finals. Hi, this is Danny LaRue from the Real GM Radio Podcast. It's that time of year again. All eyes are now on the Pro Basketball Finals and the Major League Baseball season. BetOnline.net has all the action. Basketball, the finals continues. The two hottest teams in the league make their final push for the championship. And if baseball is your first love, America's pastime is back and better than ever. The season really starts post-All-Star break. Anything can happen. BetOnline has you covered. You'll have MMA, championship boxing, golf, horse racing. They have it. BetOnline has you covered for all the news, scores, and odds. So head to the website or use your mobile device and bring home the game with BetOnline.net.